You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we are going to go through a journey and talk some about leadership development, but specifically, my guest has an interesting premise that he now operates with. There is no B2B, B2C. It is H2H. It's human to human. That's what we're doing. My guest is Bryan Kramer. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
You bet. So tell us about H2H. Where did that come from and how did you come to that conclusion?
We had been using it since we started our agency in 2002, marketing agency here in San Jose. And we always talked about what humanizes the product or the design or marketing campaigns that we were working on, and what that meant to the audience, and how we were intentional with our design. Not just the design, but the designed experiences, and really on the other end is a human being. And once social media came on the scene in 2014, I was giving a keynote at Bloomberg West, and it had almost an identical slide to what now became the cover of my book, which is there's no B2B or B2C, it's H to H, human to human. And that's not to say that we don't sell to businesses or we don't sell to consumers, but at the end of the day, the customer doesn't care. They just care about one thing, and that's the service or product that they received. And that's really the idea behind it. And so when social media came on the scene, it was really relevant at the time, because had never been a time in any time in our lifetime or even before, where a company had to answer to the consumer publicly, and social made that possible. I mean, anybody can say anything they want about any brand on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or so on and so forth. So now all of a sudden it's two-way communication. No longer is it radio, TV, and commercials talking one way at the consumer. But now, what is it, like 8-9 years later after I wrote the book, it's completely changed. It's now a matter of AI and augmented reality and virtual reality and autonomous driving. And I mean, it's just all, automation is prevalent. And so now, especially in the pandemic, we had human to Zoom to human. So it's relevant in a whole different way than when I originally intended it, but still relevant to what we're going through today.
Now, you have pivoted a little bit. You're doing coaching work with executives and business leaders, directors on boards and things like that. So what is typically the focus area when you go in and engage with one of those executives? What are they looking for and trying to do?
Yeah, I don't want to say that everybody's looking for the same thing, but there are a lot of things that are pretty similar, and that's, how do I grow my company? How do I grow the business around me without burning out, and staying creative and staying whole as a person, enjoying what I do, and leveraging the skill sets that they have to the best of what they can do while still learning. And so there's two different types of people that I work with. One is, they own their own company, and that comes with a whole different set of issues, or challenges, I should say. And the other is an executive within a company that's more entrepreneurial, and how do I manage up and down, and create what I need to fulfill my job. And so those are typically the two different types of hills to climb. Both have operational process, structure, and putting in place things that will allow you to do your job. And so that's really where I focus, is the operational system structure and self-belief on top of that, because we are, holding ourselves back from what we can do and more of what we can do. So, that's my goal.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And I'm thinking of a lot of my clients who likewise own their own business, privately held companies that, have done pretty well, but arguably they've hit a bit of a plateau. They're on that brink of burnout or frustration, or they've sort of maxed their own individual capacity to scale the business further. They've gotten it up to a certain level, and they've hit that invisible wall that prohibits them from thinking, viewing, making decisions about the next level up. So sounds like similar to you. That's a lot of the work I do to help people kind of break through that log jam that might be the head trash they're dealing with and the way they're viewing the business, which is mind-numbingly frustrating at times. But it's ultimately, at least in my humble opinion, it's ultimately about partly losing vision of where you really wanted to go when you started, but also dealing with the reality that you got to make some tougher decisions about what to do next.
Yeah, there's always a next. There's never not a next. If you have a pulse or a heartbeat, there's always a next. And I actually love to say that that the ultimate thing that we strive for is not the next. It's the now. There is really no next. The next happens because of what we're doing right now. And so we tend to, as humans, we tend to future trip. And we look at what we're supposed to be doing or how we're supposed to show up so that we can create more of what we think is going to solve the future problem that is created by us. And that's not going to help anybody. That's going to help our stress. It's going to help burnout. That's going to help the team think that we're, not sure of what the vision is. Instead, if we start focusing on what's happening, and I'm talking about presence, like having sheer presence, and presence of mind, presence of where we're at right now, listening, whether you're listening to this podcast or you and I, Doug, are sitting here, being with each other, right now. This is all and I'm not trying to sound like Buddha or anything, but this is all we have is right now. And when we can lock that in, we're going to get more done. It has nothing to do with being more productive at the end of the day. It's about how many times were you present with whatever it was that you were doing. And you're going to be way more fulfilled and way more happier in your life when you get to that level or that achievement or those moments. And yeah, it's hard. You can't do it all the time. But when we can do it more often, it's going to become like a muscle, and we can get to this place where we're going to be more joy-filled or enjoying life.
It's interesting you say that, and I'm processing a little bit because, and maybe this is ultimately saying the same thing, but I like what you said about future tripping. I love that phrase. I need to borrow that if I may have your permission to do so.
Mm-hmm. I know a guy who can approve that.
I like that phrase. And yes, I think there are people that will think about the future where they want to go with their business, but it becomes an ethereal dream. They never reverse engineer the action steps to make that become a reality. So I agree totally in working the now, but I guess I would question or add to, and give me your feedback on this. To optimize the now, you need to have a sense of purpose and intentionality about what you're doing, because otherwise you're going to get consumed in the random noise that's swirling around you. And you can be wonderfully present in a dialogue or a commentary on a social thread, but is that adding, helping you move forward in any way, shape, or form? No, it doesn't.
Not at all. Not at all. But to me, that's being intentional. With again, being present with yourself, being present with where you want to be. So if you're intentionally designing the future, then be present with that. and do that, but don't future trip over it. There's a difference between intentionally designing something. We do it all the time. You see intentional design with brands that you look at and you go, wow, that is just an incredible experience. That's because they were intentionally designed around the experience. And we have a really pleasurable or fun or humorous or whatever the emotion is around that intentional design that they designed for us to have. And so if we can be intentional with planning, absolutely do that, but do it with presence of mind and take the time to be there with it as you're doing it. And that is totally healthy, but to be there future tripping on, we have to do this in a reactive nature. Now we're no good to anybody, and we're not very present in those moments.
No.
Those moments are not current. We're thinking forward and we're not here now.
That helps clarify the thinking there, and I do like that. And so I think fundamentally we're saying the same thing.
I think you're right.
So let me ask you, the human to human thinking, when you go in and you start coaching with a business owner or an executive at one of those larger enterprises, well, let me start out by asking, what do you see as some of the hindrances that people are struggling with? Is it a legacy of tradition in the business, or a mindset that they bring to the game? Maybe it's a behavior they learn from watching another boss or another person, or maybe something they learned from their mom or dad. How do you begin assessing the sort of the backstory to help shape new thinking for getting to this human to human ability to lead teams?
Yeah, well, there's two answers. One is fundamentally to answer your question. Fundamentally, it's trust or lack of trust. I think more times than not, and there's research, with the trust barometer back this on there being the least amount of trust ever in our history, not just in politics or globe, but actually in companies. There's really, we walk in now, the glass is half empty, not the glass is half full on trust. And how do I earn trust versus how walking in already having trust? And that didn't used to be that way. It used to be that you walked in to a company and you were trusted until you weren't. And now we're having to earn it harder. It's harder to earn, and it's harder to achieve with your customer as well, because customers are so fickle. So it's happening from the inside out. The first place to start is on the inside, because the lack of trust drips down to the customer. And when you have somebody that is a leader that is creating distrust or dis-ease, it's creating a whole ball of problems, and we've got to focus on that. So that's where I'm focused, is how do we create more trust immediately, where we can put in place process, systems, and technology combined with humans. It's humans and technology working together to create more trust immediately, or faster at least. So that's the first thing. The second is using the elements of what makes us the most human brands. And those come down to the three pillars of what I also wrote about in my book, which is simplicity, empathy, and imperfection. When we know, like, and trust another human being, it's because we do trust them, but the trust is coming from a connection, a deeper connection that we have with them because of their simplicity, their empathy, and their imperfection. So when we see something that's too perfect, we veer away from it. I can dive into more examples, but that's really a lot of where I'm coming from.
On the subject of trust, a thought that came to my mind as you were describing that, in the later stages of the pandemic lockdown, when people were slowly starting to emerge, return to work, and so forth, there were a number of large global brands that I had the opportunity to be working with some of their executives, and they just happened to have done an employee engagement survey. All of them kind of simultaneously did this. And there was an interesting commonality in all the findings that were coming out for the first time ever in my own lifetime and career that I knew of. When you asked employees the question, who do you trust more, your boss or senior leadership? For decades, there was always an answer that said, I trust senior leadership, but I don't trust my boss. That was kind of a dynamic that had percolated, like I said, for decades. But this time it was flipped. I do trust my boss, but I don't trust senior leadership. And in every case, every company I was working with during this time, that absolutely threw them for tailspins. It's like, what's going on? And as I looked at it, one of the things I thought about, and not to make any excuses whatsoever, but it was all over the news. Executives were trying to make decisions about the pandemic, how to respond, come to work, stay home, vaccinate, no, don't vaccinate. If you're not vaccinated, you get fired, all these kinds of questions. And they were vacillating. I mean, they would take a stand one day and the next day they would reverse their decision and do something else. So it was creating a whole lot of uncertainty, which totally eroded and erased any trust that people might have. Yet, while all that was going on, the immediate boss was at least sitting there going, hang with us, we'll figure this out. It's okay. We're going to make it through. I'll tell you everything I can as soon as I know it. And, so their ability to raise the bar on trust did in fact increase. So it was an interesting conundrum that is going on, but I think to your point, net, all the trust levels have eroded, and it is lower predominantly than it's ever been. And that's a big burden on people that are trying to run companies and lead businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a huge burden. I think that communication in that area is key. And a lot of times, everybody gets into reactive mode, and it's because there's a tendency to want to respond immediately. You look at the Southwest airline debacle that just happened in travel, and how they responded to it was one thing. What happened was another thing, and they they saw it coming, but at the same time they didn't realize it was going to happen the way that it did. And the way that they responded to it, if you look at the communication that came out, was very well thorough and thought out, and they took their time with it. They didn't respond the next day and say, we screwed up. They really took care of everyone, to the point where, like, my brother was involved in being displaced on an airplane during that time and trying to get home. And he wrote an email to them because he wasn't, they didn't think that he was a part of like that time frame. And so they didn't take care of him. And he wrote it, and the CEO's assistant wrote him back and said, we'll take care of you. So, my point of saying all this is that the organization got connected, and the senior leadership combined with customer service was what became in lockstep. They had to, but they did a good job of getting connected, where a lot of other organizations, like what you're saying, they don't connect. They're disjointed from your boss to senior leadership, and communication isn't aligned. When you can get in alignment, man, anything is possible, as long as you're just pointed in the same direction and everyone understands what that direction is.
Right.
So I don't mean to oversimplify it, but it almost is.
Well, I think to your point, sort of the humanness of being able to admit a mistake or a defect or a breakdown in something. I've always said for a long time, I used to actually train it in my own work teams. it's not important to be perfect all the time. What's really important is how you respond to an error or a fail. If you miss a deadline or miss a delivery, how are you going to respond to that? What are you going to do with it? And I think step one in all that is own up to it and admit it. Don't try to shun it off on somebody else. And you don't have to exactly fall on your sword all the time, but if the reality is that you or your team somehow messed it up, then own it, admit it, and then explain what your solution is going to be, what the next steps can be about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny you bring up Southwest Airlines. A lot of my listeners probably have heard me tell these stories many times, but I have a special affinity for that. Once upon a time in my banking days, Herb Kelleher was actually on our board at our bank, and Herb was a regular guest speaker at officer meetings we had. We had a routine of all the officers in the bank would come together on a Friday morning, and we would have about a 30 to 45-minute meeting with senior management so that we had that communication and clarity about, where we were going and what we were doing. And Herb would always show up there, and one of his famous stories was the question of, is the customer always right? And Herb's unequivocal answer was hell no, they're not. And his quick story was in their hub in Dallas, there was a day when weather was interrupting all the flights and the schedules were all blown up and people were being delayed. And in the old Dallas Love Field, there was a terminal that had 3 different gates right in one area. So the waiting area was overlapped with 3 different flights. So it was highly congested. And there was a guy in there that was really drunk and disorderly, and he was abusing the gate agents, just cussing at them about the delays, and which they couldn't do anything about. They were just trying to do their job. And he was actually kind of verbally abusing other customers. And finally, when the flight came and the gate agent announced boarding, this guy jumped up and bullied his way to the front of the line. And what was waiting there was 2 Dallas police officers that the gate agents had called, and they cuffed him and drug him off. And when the crowd that had been watching all this for 2 hours saw that, they all erupted. It was a standing ovation to the gate agents for calling the cops on this guy. So Herb's point was, I made one customer really mad that day. He said, but I endeared about 400 others.
Mm-hmm.
So, is the customer always right? Nope.
Nope.
Not at all.
I love that. That's such a great story.
Yeah. So, and I've told that story several times on the air, and I don't know, that guy that was the one in the gate, he's probably going to find me one day and come get me, but nonetheless. So let me ask you this. I have been on a bit of a personal campaign. I've gone on record and I've written about it and talked about it. I think in the new iteration of how employees look at their work and their leadership, I think the tradition of command and control as a leadership style is on its way out. And if it's not already dead, it ought to be in a lot of places. Not everywhere. I've got some caveats to my thinking here that I can elaborate on, but there are appropriate times when you want the guy in charge to really be in charge. But otherwise, for the normal day-to-day work environment, I don't think command and control is going to sell anymore. Do you have any experience working with that or thinking about that?
Well, yeah, it's well, I don't see it working unless there's the foundation has to be set. So initially and/or along the way, we want to know where we're pointed. So somebody has to hold the vision, and really that does come from depending upon the size of the company, that comes from the leadership and knowing where we're going to be headed. However, if we're pointed based upon research and the information we've been given and the support of the team and understanding where that's coming from, then it's a co-created effort. and everything that we do becomes co-created. There's no we have this old thinking that even a CEO or a president actually can only be held by one person. But very rarely is it held by two. What if we were to go outside of the norm? I'm not suggesting every company do this by any stretch, but we could live in a co-created, much more co-created ecosystem. And when we look at it from that point of view, like a lot of Europe does, Europe is very when it comes to how they're being every day in their jobs, and when they're more interested in getting together and building community, and then growing a company based on that. Where here in the U.S. and some of Canada and other areas are more top-down approach, and so we have a lot to learn, I think, from a co-created approach where everybody can own a little piece together, and then as they say, all tides lift all boats. A tide lifts all boats. That's what it is. And so if we can get there, when we get there, and the companies that have done that have done it very well, and not just done it, but they're sustainable. They have longevity, and that's the success of any company, right? Like when you look at a company and they have longevity built into their plan. Like when you look at not REI, but the other company in Maine, I can't remember their name, but they planned their entire company around giving back to, whether you believe in global warming or not, all profits go to global warming. And so they became a longevity built company. We believe in the future of Earth, and we're going to take everything we have and put it back into that. So there's a lot of companies that I think can get very creative around how they co-create, to answer your question.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bryan, I think we're kind of up on time here. I really appreciate you sitting in and doing that. Tell us how people can get a hold of you if they are interested in learning more.
It's so hard to get in touch with me. Actually, if you go to bryankramer.com, Bryan with a Y, Kramer with a K, and you can email me at Bryan with a Y at bryankramer.com. So, and I'm also at Bryan Kramer on every social media channel. So anywhere you want to punch my first name and last name in, that's where I am. And you can sign up for my newsletter, and human to human, who would I be if I didn't reply back? So I will hit reply, and we'll have a discussion, just like two people should do in this world.
I like it. I like it a lot. Well, thank you. And as always, folks, we're going to have those links in the show notes, both in the audio stream and also on our YouTube channel over on at YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. So hop over there, take a look at the episode, and join us to look at the library there of everything else we've put out. It's been a pleasure spending time with you today. We wish you the best, and go out and make it a great one. See you soon.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.